Well, why don't we begin? I want to welcome you all to the second College of Humanities Annual Britsch Citizenship Lecture. This lecture series has been established on in memory of Todd A. Britsch. Todd, who passed away earlier last year, was a beloved humanities professor who taught at BYU from 1966 through the mid-2000s. He was educated at Florida State in the mid-60s and brought to BYU an infectious enthusiasm for his discipline as well as for BYU. His consecrated service here included serving as Dean of the College and as Academic Vice President. He is someone who personified the ideal of university thinker, always considering how nearly any prospective decision or proposal might be tweaked to redound to the benefit of the broader university community. He once said that two of the greatest lessons he learned in his work here are, one, most people want to do what is right, and two, the key to success is showing up. Today we honor Marie Orton, professor of Italian, whose own career and legacy of citizenship at BYU betrays the fact that, one, she wants to do what is good, and two, she shows up. We'll begin with an invocation offered by Dan Paul, a colleague, and then following Dan's invocation, Jennifer Haraguchi, another colleague in Italian, will offer an introduction, and then we will hear Marie expound on the topic of grace, gifts, and service. Dan?
Our dear, kind and gracious Father in heaven, we are so very grateful to be here today, to be able to hear from Marie, and grateful for her example of service and reaching out to thy children, to the one, to those who are marginalized. We're grateful for her service as a professor and for her scholarship, for her efforts in becoming more like thee, and for her discipleship. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to be here at BYU, to learn and to grow and to strengthen our faith and our testimonies alongside our knowledge of secular things. We're grateful for all the many blessings that we receive, and pray for those who may be struggling and might be ill, that they can receive health and comfort. We pray for the students in this moment as we are preparing for a holiday break, that they can have time to spend with their families, that they can soak in all of the opportunities to make memories, and that they can also have time to relax so that they can return and focus on their studies again. And we pray for thy blessing this hour, that we can feel the Spirit and be edified, and that we will have our minds open to the words that Marie will share with us. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
When I arrived at the University of Chicago in 1997, people around me kept saying, "You know, there was another Mormon here." And they said, "Do you know Marie Orton?" I was like, "No." And then I thought, this could either go one of two ways, right? And I was a little bit nervous about that, but I found that over the years, nothing but good was said about Marie Orton, and I was grateful because I was the other strange Mormon at the University of Chicago, so she paved a great way for me. She graduated with her doctorate from the University of Chicago, and she was a Fulbright scholar in Torino, at the University of Torino. She's taught at Truman State for many years before joining us here at BYU in 2016. She started her career publishing on Italian survivors of the Shoah and members of the Brigate Rosse, the terrorist organization in Italy. And then she moved to issues of multiculturalism and migration in Italy. She's published an anthology of writings by migrant authors and has co-edited volumes on diversity in contemporary writings and multicultural literature. She's co-edited a special edition of the journal Italian Studies in Southern Africa on diversity, decolonization, and Italian studies. And she's most recently translated from Italian to English many works, most recently the books of Così come la ebri, who she hosted as a special guest here at BYU last year. She's on the GWS Global Women's Studies Executive Committee, and she's a faculty advisor she has been the faculty advisor for hundreds of Global Women's Studies students. She takes that advising very seriously. If you walk by her office, there is often one or two students, and they don't have to be Italian students or GWS students. She will help anyone with their personal statements, their resumes, their life plans, one of her favorite things to say is, "Let me help you plan your life." And so many of my students have said, "She was great, she helped me plan my whole life out." She is our Italian section head and supervises and trains our student instructors. And she recently, it was a great feat to open the Casa Italiana again, and has spent a lot of time over there helping to establish students who can live and speak, eat together, and it's been a real boon for our program. My colleague Dan Paul, who just gave the prayer, and I realized how much work Marie actually does when she went on sabbatical a year ago, and we were floundering. And we could not wait. And she went out of the country too, so we could not wait till she got back. We realized that we were incapable and woefully understaffed. Many of you will remember that during COVID, if you Google her name, I was going to bring it up, but I didn't want to destroy her PowerPoint. There's a video, if you Google her name and BYU, and during COVID, she offered cooking lessons online. And many of my students tell me that she still has them come over to her house every semester to make some great Italian food. And many of you probably in this room have benefited from her gelato. And if you haven't, then ask her, because she will say, "Of course, I'll bring you gelato." And our freezer in our apartment will be filled again with cartons of gelato that she has specially made for everyone. Marie is a good friend of mine, and I'm delighted that she is getting this award. Every time, she's not only a friend, but as in her role as our department, or as our section head, I often go to her with ideas, and her immediate reply whenever I have an idea is yes, and then her second reply is, "How can I help?" She's a terrific example of service and love for her colleagues, and I'm pleased that she can present this lecture and get this award.
Okay, that was really generous. And I have to say, after our college meeting in August, when the dean announced this award, Jennifer asked me afterwards, "Is this because of that gelato you hand out to people?" And I thought, I don't know, but if so, that would be so awesome, right? I want to thank you all very, very much for coming. It is a tremendous honor to be associated in any way with something that bears the name of Todd Britsch. And I have to say also, it's kind of intimidating to be asked to give a talk on university service in the present company, because I think we can all recognize, if you look around, you don't have to look very far before you see people that are involved in so many things. You think, how on earth are they accomplishing all of that? And I also want to say, by way of managing expectations, that while talks on service are very often a kind of call to action, that's not how I framed this presentation. Mainly I see it as a chance to reflect on the many forms of service that have blessed my life, and to remember and celebrate Todd's legacy and his ethos of service. While many people here never met nor knew Todd Britsch personally, many others today here did, perhaps had a class from him, or were in the same ward or stake, or worked alongside him. The majority of my interactions with Todd Britsch took place when Brent and I returned here as young, innocent ABDs in temporary teaching positions. Brent is one of Todd's former students, and Todd was very, very kind to us in many ways. Two statements that Todd made have become integrated into our family sayings, and I would like to share them. An education in the humanities will educate you to tastes that an education in the humanities will never allow you to acquire. This is a statement that our daughter, Corinne, heard so many times growing up that I'm pretty sure that is what drove her into the arms of a career in STEM. And bad writing, even in great quantity, will never compensate for lack of thought. And I wondered what Todd would have said about ChatGPT. I wanted to understand better Todd's views, specifically on service. So in addition to reading his 5 official university talks, which you can all find at speeches.byu.edu, and I recommend them to everyone, I turned to Todd's longtime friend and colleague, Professor George Tate. I learned I learned that George had been one of Todd's students in his German 445 class, Cultural History, the first year that Todd was on the faculty at BYU. And I just have to add that for the genealogy, Dr. Tate then became one of my favorite teachers when I was an undergrad here at BYU, and I owe him an enormous debt because it was his Humanities 201 course that flipped me from chemistry major to humanities major. As our dean explained, Todd taught here for 39 years. He was a department chair, dean of the College of Humanities and AVP, and while he did receive official university recognitions, much of his service went unheralded. It was George who explained to me that Todd served in various assignments, some of which he did not necessarily relish, and even that caused him anguish. But that in situations of difficulty or conflict, Todd's approach was always to act as generously as possible. He was deeply concerned with the spiritual and academic growth of his students, and the greatest compliment to Todd was to be called university-minded. I understand this to mean, as our dean explained, that Todd considered and approached every issue from as many perspectives as possible, and that the good of the university and the students came before all else. As I've reflected on what it means to be university-minded, in terms of what we call citizenship or university service, I found myself thinking of service in general, and I'd like to share 5 thoughts. This is a good starting point for my thoughts on service. I think I relate very much to the Mr. Emerson character from this novel, that it can feel like when we're trying to serve, we're trying to learn how to do it while we're doing it. Trying to serve inevitably involves making mistakes, falling short, feeling inadequate, and being awkward. Attempts flop or even backfire. My own efforts often feel clumsy or silly, and while this awareness is perpetually uncomfortable, it also serves to remind me that real service resists that unfortunate social hierarchy that implies somehow the giver is greater than the recipient of service. That valorization simply does not apply. Service makes us equals. One emblematic example of this is from our second year at Truman State University, where Brent and I taught from 2000 to 2016. There was a German colleague in what was for us the Department of Languages, Greg Richter, here he is. He sent an email to the 56 of us teaching languages in which he explained that he had been diagnosed with a rare blood condition, and it was basically a ticking time bomb. He concluded his message to us with something to the effect, I have no idea how long this condition, how it will develop, how long it will last. I could be with you 20 more minutes or 20 more years, but please don't feel like you have to pull away from me because you don't know what to do or say. My association with my colleagues is just too important. I didn't know what to do or say, and I didn't know him well. I made a loaf of bread, and I took it to his house. When he came to the door, I held it out, and I got as far as saying, Greg, I read your email, and I will never forget his expression when he said, thank you. In addition to the new thing, I also have celiac disease. Right? He talked to me for a long time. His wife invited us in to dinner another day. Over the next months and years, our families ended up doing a lot of things together. Greg's graciousness in acknowledging my uninformed attempt became an act of grace in itself. Greg valued honesty in relationships too much to merely spare my feelings. Even though the bread ended up at his neighbor's house, and my attempt at service seemed like a fail, when Greg met me on the doorstep, he brought such an atmosphere of grace, it erased any distinction between would-be giver and would-be recipient. He met me there as a friend. My second thought was, in our religious culture, there is much conflicting rhetoric swirling around the injunction to serve. On the one hand, we're supposed to lose ourselves in the service of others, and at the same time, not run faster than we have strength. We all know that we are supposed to accept service as readily as we give it, but we still persist in believing that somehow it's morally superior to pull our own weight and never have to ask other people. We acknowledge daily that we're great debtors to grace, but angels above us are silent notes taking, and if I don't put my shoulder to the wheel and do some good in the world today, I have failed indeed. So, perhaps when resources are eternal, we won't have to count costs, but we're not in that situation yet. So until then, my belief is that we just have to go back to point number 1 and be okay with being clumsy and relying on grace, because ultimately, it's not so much about getting service right or wrong, but more about persisting even though we often get it wrong. My third point is, when we do manage to get it right, serving facilitates change, and that is a gift of grace. I think of how we most often use the verb to serve in English. It's a transitive verb. It wants a direct object. We say we're serving someone or something. No man can serve two masters. But I also believe the intransitive form is equally important, as in the construction serves to. In Italian, you knew there would be a verb. The verb servire, to serve, is most frequently used in this second sense, to mean to be useful, to be necessary, or even to have a purpose. In Italian, we don't ask so much how something serves as what it serves to do. A cosa serve? I've had students ask me recently what specific assignments serve to do. I've been asked if exams serve mainly to create fear. Of course they do, but that's on the students. Fear is not the use to which I intend tests. Anything can serve to be useful to many masters. Education itself can have the purpose of enabling one to make money, or it can prove useful by serving to impart meaning of other kinds. I think of this Italian construction in terms of what we're trying to do here at the university, and especially in our college. Educating students serves to help them fit into the world, deal with contradiction and ambiguity, appreciate multiple perspectives, analyze information so they can make informed choices. For me, to serve in this sense of affecting change automatically gives purpose and meaning. Anytime we interact with someone else, anytime our words serve to commiserate, to reassure, to express friendship, or to uplift, we participate in something potentially transformative. And that opens up a space where, once again, the distinction between giver and recipient of the service ceases to be important. When we shape or color or expand someone else's relationship with the world, we shape the very reality of that world in a way that merely enabling the acquisition of money does not. And we don't always know whose reality we may have altered. This became abundantly clear to me the first summer I taught at Truman State. They have a program there called the Joseph Baldwin Academy. 250 junior high students who come to the school for a 3-week college experience. This means that they live in the dorms, they take an intensive class, they have evening and weekend activities. I had 25 of them in an intensive language and Italian language and literature class from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, and half days on Saturdays. My first time around, there was a real learning curve to teach 13-year-olds for 50 hours a week. But I ended up doing it nearly every summer after, in part because of something that happened after my first year. The director called me into his office 2 weeks after the program ended. I was well aware that the first time through had been a little rocky. He had received a letter from a parent he wanted to read to me from a student in my class. My heart immediately began to pound in panic, and I thought, the parents are demanding their money back. This student did not have a good experience and can't speak any Italian. So he started reading the letter out loud to me, and it was one of the good ones. But what startled me was the level of detail. The parent went on to list the daughter's insights about how language functions, how cultures change, the cause of the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of fascism. The mother went on to say that the daughter had made every recipe for the family that I had taught them. And I thought, who was this? Could it have been Sarah? She was exceptionally bright. Maybe it was Amanda. She was so engaged. And when the director finally got to the student's name, I thought, what, little Tiffany? Surely not. From where I sat, it seemed like she had 2 goals for the program, and the first was to hone her flirting skills. And the second was to see if the human organism can subsist exclusively on pixie sticks. But in that moment, I had an epiphany. Most of the time, I won't get to see my students' growth, let alone know if I had anything to do with it. But as we try year after year and lesson after lesson to do as our Dean Scott Miller encouraged us to do in the college meeting and herd the students in our classroom through that magic gate that's going to transform them into dragons, I believe teaching can become a spiritual practice and a covenant trust, one that transforms us as much as it transforms our students. My 4th point is about service and the transactional model. I once attended a university graduation ceremony as a faculty member where the commencement speaker had all of the faculty stand up so the audience could applaud to thank us, after which a colleague turned to me and jokingly said, "Well, that certainly compensates for everything we've had to suffer." We are socialized to feel we should not want or expect thanks ever. We are in a service profession after all. So when parents at graduation or students at the end of the semester get kind of warm and sometimes even effusive, we are conditioned to react with a, "Just doing my job, man." Still, in my office, there's a drawer where I put every note from students, sometimes notes of thanks, sometimes notes of apology. I'm not the only one. I can't bring myself to toss out those pieces of paper. Those kind words matter too deeply to me. Even more, it's intensely gratifying when the students see the value of what we're doing in the humanities. It fills me with hope that what they've learned in our classes will help them to navigate the world that they will have to enter. And I hope they enter that world with an attitude of charity. King Benjamin addresses the intersection of gratitude and service, exploding completely the idea of service as transaction. We aren't paying a debt to God with our service or our thanks. It would be impossible to do so, not just because the debt is so great we will always be unprofitable servants, but because it's not a transaction. It's not so much that we are serving, but that we are serving too. In our context at the university, our actions are affecting, are forming, are instantiating. In a very real way, our classes can be reality making for our students. If what they read and discuss ends up shaping their perceptions or how they react, how they interact with others or with the divine, their ability to interpret, then we're participating in shaping their future, their reality. And that's all already outside of the economy of service as exchange. This alternate economy is far more suggestive of a gift. It's a tremendous gift to work with young people during their decade of decisions, to empower them with words, and even more, hopefully, with faith, hope, and charity. The greatest part for me is how others, teachers, colleagues, friends, teachers who have become friends, did the same for me, for all of us. King Benjamin's address shows me that this non-transactional model is how we are to interact with our fellow beings, not seeing service in terms of payment or debt, for in the creative, informative act of serving too, we transcend all models of service and thanks. I think of my attempt to serve my friend Greg Richter, and he thanked me for my service. But what that interaction served to usher into being, a friendship, human ties, human meaning, was greater and at the same time more effervescent than anything thanks could repay or transactionality could calculate. How can we weigh the price of an ever-expanding reality? We are saved by grace, and we are served by grace. My fifth point is about Derrida and the gift. My first year in the graduate program, Jacques Derrida delivered a series of lectures at the University of Chicago, the Carpenter Lectures, where he spoke extensively about the gift and how that relates to the human preoccupation with transaction. These later became his book, Given Time, Counterfeit. For Derrida, the gift exists as a concept, but one that can never be realized, at least not from within the human transactional model. Every time we acknowledge or thank, even by gratitude or even to acknowledge the gift as such, this constitutes a kind of repayment, and that nullifies the anti-transactional nature of the gift. And without that, a gift cannot be a gift. But as Derrida developed his argument, this seemed not so much an act of deconstruction of the concept of gift as resituating the gift outside of experience. That is, the gift is that which the economy can never realize in itself. Once it's brought into the economy of exchange, it can no longer be a gift. At the same time, the whole economy of exchange and every transaction within it exists as a kind of sullied violation of the gift. Transaction denies the gift, even as it simultaneously is aware it is poor and fallen substitute, grounded on the gift, but forever unable to partake. And okay, the religiously tinted language was mine, not Derrida's. Still, the transcendent nature of the gift promises something potentially messianic, and Derrida himself may have suggested the same. The concept of gift takes me back again to King Benjamin. His powerful address, beginning in Mosiah chapter 2, seems to situate service and Christ's ultimate gift of the atonement specifically in terms of transaction and indebtedness. But I think that the context and the heart of Benjamin's efforts militate against that very idea. First of all, King Benjamin's sermon comes about in a context of purification. The people have traveled up to the temple with animals to sacrifice in acts of ritual purification. And Benjamin himself tells his people he's speaking to them in order to purify himself, to answer with a clear conscience before God and rid his garments of their blood. To read this as a transactional, if ritual, discharging of a debt could be fair, and in this context, King Benjamin, in fact, talks much about debt and indebtedness. For example, he reminds us that we are all beggars, that we, like other dust, belong to God, and that it's impossible to square our debt with God. But while King Benjamin situates this call to service and his promise of Christ's gift within the discourse of debt, I don't believe that automatically makes the two ideas reinforce each other, quite the opposite. King Benjamin's sub-discourse about gifts and service, in my view, actually works against this larger discourse of transaction. I would argue that Benjamin uses this larger context to set off, not include, works of service and the gift. Even though King Benjamin tells us our debt to God is unpayable, he goes to great effort to tell his own people he does not delight in transaction, specifically not in debt. He has not sought gold or silver from them. He has forbidden his people to make slaves of one another. He's gone out of his way as king to divorce his own support from any burden on his subjects. His own actions suggest that he wishes to break with the traditional economic relationships, specifically in terms of his own position as king, his own earthly authority. He goes so far as to invert the economics of rulership when he tells everyone gathered there he has spent his days in their service. And then he quickly clarifies that wasn't to establish any kind of obligation. Instead, he defers the whole issue to the economy of God. I have only been in the service of God. And then he tells his subjects, that same deferment of economic burden applies to them. I tell you these things that ye may learn wisdom, that ye may learn that when ye are in the service of your fellow beings, ye are only in the service of your God. For King Benjamin, it seems service cannot be reckoned within a human economy, for it all belongs to God. Benjamin even presents the atonement as an act of service that can rend another more cosmic economy. Yes, humans are indebted to God, but only one thing can snatch the sinner from the cycle of exchange, payment, and debt, and that thing is a further gift. A gift given by the one who is owed, and given to all of us, those who already owe. Evidently, the atonement can do what French philosophy cannot. Messianically, make the gift itself imminent, and in the presence of that eternal gift, transactional economy vaporizes completely. The human debt, Benjamin tells us, is unpayable, is not repaid. It simply is no more. While not every act of service brings about the mystical fusion of earthly and divine, I believe there's a reason King Benjamin made service the crux of his argument. His discourse on the atonement in Mosiah chapter 3 is situated right between these bookends of chapter 2 and 4 that both outline how we are to treat one another, suggesting that through service, we can approach the gift of the atonement. Service is that spark of the divine gift given to mortals to give to each other. In a small way, it comes as close as we ever can to having the celestial velocity to escape the transactional, debt-inducing gravity of human culture. Certainly, King Benjamin considers service to be nearer the divine economy than the human. Ideally, service is the mortal reenactment of the divine gift, both in acknowledgement of our indebtedness to God and the joy in our freedom to escape that human indebtedness. This is our great cause to rejoice. And I will now say everyone's favorite words at these events. In conclusion, I believe that our pursuit of knowledge is what makes us human and helps us to seek and understand the divine, that grace is so evident when we serve, and even though my own attempts to understand and live the gospel can sometimes leave me with more angst than answers, I have faith God's wisdom will bless us with every good gift. I thank George Tate for this photo of Todd as King Benjamin near his favorite fifth bridge in Rock Canyon from a state youth activity in 2018. And I would like to end with some of Todd's words from his final official address at the university. I have come to believe that we simply would be incapable of functioning if we did not acknowledge each other's unique contributions to the whole body. For if we wish to enjoy all the gifts of the Spirit, we will have to receive them through each other. Ultimately, I'm convinced that our value as a university is dependent upon our capacity to live together in charity. That charity has been lavished on me and my family for years by the people in this room. And for that, I say it with all my heart. Thank you. But I think I should only take questions relative to gelato. Kayla.
What's the difference between ice cream and gelato?
Oh, what a good question. How much time do you have? I'll make it brief, but I'll fail. Okay, 3 things: fat, sugar, and air. Ice cream has way more. Gelato has way less. In America, the FDA says that you can have as much as 120% more air. So if you have a gallon of liquid, it can turn into a gallon and a quart of ice cream. So some are not that much more. Premium ice creams are as much. For fat, they say it has to have at least 10% fat to be ice cream, but it can have as much as 19, which would be like Ben & Jerry's Talenti, right? So that's regulated. And sugar, it's about 3 times as much as gelato. What the Italians regulate is how much air you put in. You can't put in more than 6% and have it be gelato. And how do I know this? You make friends with gelatai. You make friends with the people in Italy doing this, and you can look up the other stuff on the FDA website. But so those 3 things are the main thing, and basically gelato is just a lot better, so we have to know that. But yes, thank you for that question. That was a short answer. Other questions? Annalisa.
I have a question related to service. Have you found that your service or your capacity for service, your time fluctuates depending on sort of what stage of your life you're in? Or do we always sort of have limited amounts of
Or my machine.
energy and time to do these kinds of things?
No, we fluctuate wildly, like even during the active service, right? Like, I thought this was a good idea, and now I hate it, right? That happens too, right? Though I have to say, we have a really good friend who's a minister for the Disciple of Christ, and he's a youth minister, really high intensity. And he said that in his work, he saw that it's not always a question of overextending as a question of under-meaning. The more meaningful something is, it tends to give more energy to him. So he offered that. It's an idea. Rob?
You've done such great work with first generation people. What have you learned? What are some lessons you've learned from students who come here as the first members of their families who have an education?
Oh, it's super humbling. It's super humbling to work with people who've made huge sacrifices. And the first thing I'd say is, it's so humbling to see the huge sacrifices their families often make for people to do this. I've also realized how immediately someone can become derailed for the lack of the smallest bit of information. So one example that comes to mind is a student who left the university in her first semester because a person in the situation who she had broken her foot on the 3rd week. She'd slipped on some ice, and she didn't know there was a health center, and she didn't know that her parents' insurance from another state could be applicable here, and she didn't know where to go, and she didn't know who to ask, and she didn't know how to start this. And so she got worse and worse and worse, and she missed more and more classes, and she finally went through for the lack of information. And I feel like at a place at BYU where we're rich with resources and rich with people who want to help, the information gap is super critical to overcome. I guess that's my big takeaway.
So for those of us who would like to be more like you.
I'll give you my recipe book. It's on a Google Doc.
No, I mean, not about making gelato, but that's part of it. So it's why you make gelato. That's the thing. So one of the paradoxes in the gospel is that we are commanded to love. I think it's a paradox because if I love because I'm commanded to do it, is that really love? And then it gets into a transactional thing like you've been talking about. I love because I'll get something out of it. Ultimately, eternal life, but other stuff too. But that's not really love either, because love is selfless, right? So is the solution to becoming more charitable, to do charitable things, and then you suddenly become charitable by doing those things. You cease to worry about your reward. You cease to worry about what you might be getting out of it. Do you see the paradox in that?
I do, and I think Derrida would be so proud of you right now. I don't know, because I'm not sure if I'm that person, Jeff, right? I mean, we're all still trying, and you know what I mean? I mean, we're all still trying and working on it, and I don't know if parenting's any kind of a paradigm. Once you get into it, it's like, all the rules changed, right? I mean, we can't even think in those terms anymore. It's all so much bigger than that, which doesn't mean you still don't get exhausted or not know what to do or those kinds of things. So that's a non-answer. I mean, Dante would say to contemplate is as great as to do, but he's dead. So, so I think there's great worth in reflecting. It was the picture of Todd at the 5th grade in Rock Canyon that made me think in all these ways, and that was really very meaningful for me to think about Mosiah 2 through 5 very differently. So I think anything we do, right, is good for somebody. We're trying to get through the Dragon Gate too and be transformed into dragons. Non-answer, I'm sorry, Jeff. Can we have at least one more question so we don't end with that? That was a total non-answer. If somebody will be bold, I'll promise it's the last one.
What's a great example of service in literature that you've taught or studied?
Wow. Every year in our Intro to Literature course, we teach Così come l'Evry's Embarrassments, which is about his experiences as an African-Italian author and his experiences as an African in Italy and trying to navigate what that means in Italian culture. And the other text we teach is Primo Levi's Shoah Memorial. If this is a survival in Auschwitz, I think it's translated in English. And these are both examples of where you have to step out of that economy of transaction and service and thinking of what's good for somebody else. It's a much more direct contact with the other that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, but it's that direct contact with the other. So we teach those every semester. And students always want to wrestle with really difficult concepts. It makes me respect them very much. I said it was the last, but James had his hand up. So.
I was just wanting you to put into your own words how you think students' lives are blessed by connecting them to the world beyond campus.
For International Education Week this week, it will get you a short pass through the Dragon Gate. You will be transformed. I have and Jennifer Haraguchi, who is in charge of our internship program, sees this far more directly and far more often than I do. One reason I love it is because I've never, in 26 years of teaching and over 8,000 students, I've never had anybody come back from a study abroad experience and say, me. Never, right? Never. It's always on the degree of fabulous to unspeakably fabulous. And it makes them realign. I think whenever you're living in a context that's not yours, you have to redefine where all the lines are, and that makes you wonder who you are and redefine that. And it's absolutely, absolutely transformative. But it's never math. Anything else? Okay, gelato to the people. And